You won't get a single dollar. My husband didn't shout. He didn't slam the table. He simply smiled with the quiet confidence of a man who believed he had already won. I transferred everything months ago. The house isn't mine anymore. The company isn't mine. The investment accounts aren't mine either. They all belong to my brother now. He leaned back in his leather chair and folded his hands as though he had just solved a difficult business problem. You spent 15 years helping me build this life, he said. But legally, you own nothing. I stared at him for several seconds. Then I quietly stood, walked to the hallway closet, and returned carrying an old blue folder covered in dust. I placed it gently on the dining table. For someone who planned every detail, I said softly, you forgot the one file you asked me to keep. The smile disappeared from his face. His attorney reached for the folder. The moment he opened the first page, the entire room fell silent. People often think betrayal begins with an affair. Doesn't. It begins the day someone starts believing they're more important than the person standing beside them. My name is Emily Harrison. I'm 52 years old. For 15 years I believed I had a happy marriage. My husband, Daniel Harrison, owned a successful commercial construction company in suburban Chicago. Everyone admired him. Clients respected him. Employees feared disappointing him. Neighbors called him a self-made millionaire. Whenever people complimented his success, Daniel would smile modestly and say, I've been lucky. Only I knew how much of that luck had been built inside our kitchen. Before Daniel started his business, he was just another project manager working 60 hours a week for someone else's company. He had talent. He had ambition. But he had no savings. No investors. No business experience. No one willing to lend him money. Except me. At the time, I worked as an accounting supervisor for a regional manufacturing company. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid well. When Daniel told me he dreamed of starting his own company, I believed in him long before anyone else did. I emptied nearly all of my savings. Almost $130,000. Money I had inherited after my father's death. Money I had planned to use for our future children and eventually retirement. Instead, I invested it in Daniel's dream. He cried the day I handed him the cashier's check. I'll never forget this, he promised. I'll spend the rest of my life proving you made the right decision. Back then I believed every word. The first few years were difficult. There were nights when Daniel slept in his office because projects were behind schedule. I handled everything else. I paid the bills, balanced the books, prepared tax documents, scheduled appointments, negotiated with insurance companies, filed permits, answered customer emails when his assistant quit. Sometimes I even cleaned the office on weekends because hiring janitors was too expensive. When people congratulated Daniel for building a successful company from nothing, I smiled. I never corrected them. I didn't need recognition. Watching my husband succeed felt like succeeding together. At least that's what I believed. The company grew faster than anyone expected. Within 7 years, Daniel employed over 80 people. By year 10, the company was winning multimillion-dollar commercial contracts. We bought a beautiful brick home in Naperville. 5 bedrooms. A 3-car garage. Large backyard. Everything we had once dreamed about. Friends often joked that I had married a genius. I laughed along with them. Nobody saw the spreadsheets I prepared until midnight. Nobody noticed the weekends I spent organizing payroll while Daniel met investors. Nobody realized success had been built by 2 people. Even if only one name appeared on the company sign. That never bothered me, because Daniel always told me we were partners. Until he slowly stopped saying it. The changes weren't dramatic. Not at first. They were small enough to ignore. He stopped asking about my day. Business dinners became more frequent. His phone never left his pocket. When it vibrated, he would glance at the screen and quietly leave the room. New suits appeared in the closet. Expensive cologne replaced the brand he'd worn for years. He suddenly cared about going to the gym 4 mornings every week. When I asked why, he laughed. Successful businessmen can't look old. It sounded harmless. So I laughed too. Looking back, I realized I wasn't laughing because the joke was funny. I was laughing because I wanted to believe nothing had changed. Then came the business trips. Chicago, Dallas, Denver. Atlanta. There always seemed to be another meeting, another conference, another client dinner. Sometimes he returned carrying gifts, perfume, jewelry, flowers. They almost made me feel guilty for questioning him. Almost. One Friday evening, Daniel came home nearly 3 hours later than usual. As he placed his jacket over the chair, a woman's perfume drifted through the dining room. Not mine. Sweet. Floral. Expensive. I noticed it immediately. So, I asked casually while preparing dinner, "How was the meeting?" He didn't even look at me. Long. Who attended? Our executive team. His answer arrived too quickly, like something rehearsed. I watched him loosen his tie. There was a faint lipstick stain near the collar. Dark red. Not bright enough to catch attention unless someone knew exactly where to look. I said nothing. Instead, I quietly washed my hands and continued stirring the soup. Some truths need time before they're ready to be spoken aloud. Over the following months, the distance between us continued growing. We still shared the same house, the same dinner table, the same bedroom, but it felt as though an invisible wall had been built between us. One evening, while folding laundry, I accidentally discovered a hotel receipt inside Daniel's jacket pocket. The hotel wasn't in Dallas. It wasn't even near the conference center where he claimed to be staying. Instead, it was a luxury boutique hotel nearly 40 miles away. 2 guests. 1 suite. 3 nights. My hands trembled. I could have confronted him immediately. Instead, I folded the receipt and slipped it back into the pocket. Not because I was afraid. Because accountants understand something emotions often forget. Never accuse someone before you have the complete picture. Facts first. Feelings later. From that day forward, I began paying closer attention. Nothing dramatic. Just observation. Dates. Receipts. Credit card statements. Business schedules. Phone bills. Little inconsistencies began appearing everywhere. Meetings that never existed. Flights booked under different itineraries. Restaurant charges on evenings he claimed to be eating alone. The pieces slowly formed a picture I no longer wanted to deny. Daniel wasn't just having an affair. He had been living another life. And somehow, I had become the only person who didn't know. Then on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, everything changed. Daniel called unexpectedly. "Can you be home by 6?" he asked. His voice sounded unusually calm. "I need to discuss something important." My stomach tightened. After 15 years together, I knew that tone. It was the voice people use when they've already made a decision. "I'll be home," I replied. Exactly at 6 o'clock, Daniel walked through the front door wearing a navy blue suit. Behind him came a woman I'd never seen before. She couldn't have been older than 32. Elegant. Confident. Beautiful. She carried herself as though she already belonged inside my home. Daniel closed the door, looked at me, then quietly said the sentence that would destroy everything I thought I knew about my marriage. "Emily, I want you to meet the woman I'm going to marry." For a moment, I honestly thought I had misunderstood him. The woman standing beside Daniel offered me a polite smile, almost as if we had been introduced at a neighborhood barbecue instead of inside the home I had spent 15 years building. She was tall, impeccably dressed, with dark blonde hair resting neatly over one shoulder. Her confidence filled the room before she even spoke. "I'm Claire," she said gently, extending her hand. "I've heard so much about you." I looked at her hand but made no effort to shake it. Instead, my eyes returned to Daniel. "What did you just say?" He sighed as though I were making an already difficult conversation unnecessarily complicated. "I said I'm in love with Claire." Silence settled over the dining room. The clock hanging on the kitchen wall continued ticking, almost mocking the moment. "I've been trying to find the right time to tell you." "The right time?" I repeated quietly. He nodded. "I didn't want to hurt you." I almost laughed. Not because anything was funny. Because those words sounded absurd coming from a man who had just walked into our home with another woman. Claire lowered her eyes. "I told Daniel this would be difficult." "It is difficult," I replied without looking at her. "This is my house." Daniel immediately corrected me. "Our house." There was something about the way he emphasized the word "our" that made my stomach tighten. It felt rehearsed. Calculated. like someone reading from a prepared script. He gestured toward the dining table. Can we sit down? I remained standing. You can. Daniel pulled out a chair while Claire quietly sat beside him. For a strange moment, they looked like a married couple discussing household expenses. I suddenly felt like the guest. Daniel folded his hands together. I know you're angry. I know this isn't what you expected. But this marriage has been over for a long time. I stared at him. When exactly did it end? He hesitated. I don't know.
Ido, he answered.
It ended the day you stopped respecting me. His jaw tightened. This isn't about respect. It's about happiness. I nodded slowly. So you're happier with her? Yes. He didn't hesitate. That single word hurt more than discovering the affair itself. Not because he loved someone else, but because 15 years together could now be summarized with one effortless answer. Claire finally spoke. I never wanted anyone to get hurt. I turned toward her for the first time. Did you know he was married? Her expression froze. Yes. And you still chose to be with him? She swallowed. It's complicated.
No, he replied calmly.
It isn't. Daniel leaned forward. Don't blame Claire. I'm the one who made this decision. I don't blame her. I looked directly into his eyes. I blame the man who promised to spend the rest of his life with me. His face remained surprisingly calm, almost detached. That frightened me more than anger ever could. It meant he had emotionally left this marriage long before he decided to announce it. He reached inside his leather briefcase and removed a thick envelope. I've already spoken with an attorney. He slid it across the table. These are the divorce papers. The envelope stopped directly in front of me. I didn't touch it. Daniel continued speaking as though presenting quarterly financial results. We can handle everything peacefully. No court. No arguments. No unnecessary legal expenses. His confidence was unmistakable. I've already arranged everything. There it was again. That sentence. Everything. It sounded less like reassurance and more like a warning. What exactly have you arranged? I asked. Daniel leaned back. The company is protected. The house has already been transferred. My investment portfolio has been restructured. My retirement accounts have new beneficiaries. The vehicles have been reassigned. He spoke each sentence with remarkable precision, almost proudly. I started planning several months ago. I looked at him without saying a word. He mistook my silence for defeat. You see, Emily, I knew this conversation would eventually happen. So I made sure the transition would be simple. Simple. The word echoed inside my mind. 15 years of marriage. Countless sacrifices. Sleepless nights. Dreams we built together. Reduced to a simple transition. I don't understand, I said quietly. If the house was transferred. Transferred to whom? My brother. What? My brother, Michael. I blinked. Michael Harrison lived nearly 3 hours away. He had never shown any interest in real estate. In fact, he rarely visited us at all. Daniel continued. The construction company was transferred to him as well. And the investment accounts? Also Michael. I frowned. Why would your brother own everything you've spent 15 years building? It's temporary. He smiled confidently. Perfectly legal. I had spent more than 20 years working in accounting. Very few people use the phrase perfectly legal, unless they were trying to convince themselves. Claire watched quietly from beside him. She seemed uncomfortable now. Perhaps she hadn't expected this conversation to become so technical. Daniel crossed one leg over the other. I know what you're thinking. You believe half of everything belongs to you. He shook his head. But legally, it doesn't. I studied his face carefully. This wasn't the man I had married. The Daniel I knew celebrated every contract by bringing pizza home for the entire office. The Daniel I loved once apologized for forgetting our anniversary by surprising me with flowers and handwritten letters. This man sitting across from me looked like a corporate executive delivering bad news to an employee being laid off.
No emotion. No regret.
Only efficiency. I suppose you've thought about this for quite some time, I said. Almost a year. The words landed harder than I expected. Almost a year. For nearly 12 months. He had kissed me goodbye every morning, asked me to make his favorite coffee, thanked me for cooking dinner, celebrated holidays beside me, all while secretly planning our divorce. I looked toward Claire. How long have you two been together? She glanced nervously at Daniel. He answered instead. About 11 months. Almost exactly the same amount of time. Everything suddenly aligned. The business trips. The late meetings. The new cologne. The hotel receipts. It hadn't been coincidence. It had been a carefully constructed second life. I see. Daniel seemed relieved by my calmness. I was hoping you'd understand. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. You think I understand? I think you're practical. You've always been reasonable. I appreciate that. Reasonable. That was how he saw me now. Not his wife. Not his partner. Just someone expected to quietly cooperate. He pushed the envelope slightly closer. If you sign tonight, we can both move on. Claire finally reached for Daniel's hand beneath the table. It was a small gesture, but I noticed it. So did he. He squeezed her fingers gently, the same way he used to squeeze mine whenever I felt nervous before an important event. Something inside me cracked. Not loudly, not dramatically, just enough for me to realize that the marriage I had been trying to save no longer existed. I stood from my chair. I need a glass of water. Daniel nodded. Take your time. As I walked into the kitchen, I rested both hands against the countertop. My breathing remained steady. Years of accounting had taught me one important lesson. Numbers never lie. People do. Emotions cloud judgment. Documents don't. Behind me, I could hear Daniel speaking quietly to Claire. He'll be fine, he whispered. No drama. Emily has never been the emotional type. I almost smiled. He still believed he knew me. He believed calm meant defeated. He believed silence meant surrender. He had no idea that while he spent the last year planning how to leave me, I had spent the last 15 years documenting almost every financial decision our family had ever made. And unlike memories, paper never forgets. I stayed in the kitchen for several minutes before returning to the dining room. Not because I needed more time, because I needed to watch them. People reveal the most about themselves when they believe the conversation is over. Daniel and Claire were speaking quietly. Neither of them noticed me standing in the hallway. She took it better than I expected, Claire whispered. I told you she would, Daniel replied confidently. Emily hates confrontation. Claire looked uncertain. What if she hires an attorney? Daniel chuckled. An attorney can't divide property that doesn't belong to me anymore. He sounded almost amused. I moved everything before filing. There isn't much anyone can do now. Claire smiled with obvious relief. So, it's finally over? Daniel reached across the table and gently squeezed her hand. Yes. We're free. I quietly stepped back into the room. Neither of them realized I had heard every word. Daniel looked up. You okay? I nodded. I'm fine. He seemed relieved. I appreciate you staying calm. I've spent my entire career solving problems calmly, I answered. This won't be any different. He mistook that as acceptance. Good. The less suspicious he became, the more comfortable he would be revealing everything. I finally picked up the envelope containing the divorce papers. The stack was surprisingly thick. Nearly 80 pages. Most people would have focused on the emotional parts. I ignored those completely. Instead, I flipped directly to the financial disclosures. Years of accounting had trained my eyes to find numbers before words. Within seconds, something caught my attention. The marital residence. Transferred 6 months earlier. New owner, Michael Harrison. Purchase price $10. I read it again. $10. A house worth nearly $2 million sold for 10. Interesting. Very interesting. I turned another page. The company shares. Transferred to Michael Harrison. Purchase price. $100. I continued reading. Luxury SUV. Transferred. Lake house. Transferred. Investment portfolio. Transferred. Even Daniel's vintage Corvette collection had been transferred. Every major asset. Every valuable possession. All to the same person. Always for almost nothing. I slowly closed the folder. Daniel watched me. You understand now? I understand what the paperwork says. He smiled. That's what matters. No. What mattered was why. Because no experienced attorney would recommend transferring millions of dollars in assets for token amounts unless there was another purpose behind it. Fraud, tax avoidance, or hiding marital property. Any of those possibilities could become very expensive. Daniel stood. I'll give you a few days before you sign. I don't need a few days. His eyebrows lifted. I'll read everything tonight. That's reasonable. Claire also stood. It was nice meeting you, Emily. I looked directly into her eyes. I wish we had met under different circumstances. For the first time that evening, guilt appeared on her face. Very briefly. Then it disappeared. The front door closed behind them. The house became silent. 15 years. Reduced to silence. I remained standing in the dining room for almost 5 minutes. Not crying. Not screaming. Just thinking. Eventually, I walked upstairs toward the home office. Most people believed the office belonged to Daniel. Technically, it did. But there was one room attached to it that nobody ever entered. A small storage room filled with filing cabinets. Daniel jokingly called it Emily's museum. He hated paperwork. I loved organization. Over the years, every important document passed through my hands before being archived. Tax returns, payroll reports, corporate minutes, loan agreements, insurance policies, mortgage files, vendor contracts, shareholder documents, permits, receipts, even handwritten notes from the early days of the business. Whenever Daniel needed something, he always asked the same question. Emily, where did you put it? He never once asked whether I had kept it, because he knew I kept everything. I unlocked the storage room. Rows of neatly labeled gray filing cabinets stood exactly where they had for years. Nothing had changed. Except now. They mattered more than ever. I walked to cabinet 3. Drawer B. Corporate formation. There it was. The original incorporation documents from 15 years earlier. I placed them on the desk. Then cabinet 4. Tax filings. Drawer 1. Then loan agreements. Then shareholder records. Within 20 minutes, my desk was completely covered. I wasn't searching randomly. I already knew where everything was, because I had organized every single document myself. As I worked, memories flooded back. Daniel signing paperwork without reading it. Daniel asking me to handle the boring stuff. Daniel laughing whenever I insisted on keeping duplicate copies. You'll never need all this paper, he used to say. I smiled sadly. Maybe not. Until today. Around 9 that evening my phone rang. It was my younger sister, Rachel. I almost ignored it. Instead I answered. She immediately sensed something was wrong. Emily, are you crying? No. What happened? I looked around the office. How could I explain 15 years collapsing into one evening? Daniel wants a divorce. Silence. Then, what? He brought another woman into our house. Rachel gasped. Tell me you're joking. I wish I were. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Finally, she asked the question everyone else would eventually ask. What are you going to do? I looked at the mountain of paperwork covering my desk. I'm going to work. She sounded confused. Work? I'm going to find the truth. Rachel sighed. Emily, you don't have to be strong all the time. I know. But this isn't about being strong. It's about being accurate. She laughed softly despite the circumstances. Only you would respond to divorce. By organizing documents. I've always believed facts matter. They do. But promise me something. What? If you discover he's done something illegal, don't protect him. That sentence lingered after we ended the call. Don't protect him. 4 years. I had protected Daniel. Protected his reputation. Protected his business. Protected his mistakes. When payroll was short during the company's second year, I quietly loaned money from my personal savings. When a supplier threatened legal action over delayed payments, I negotiated a settlement before Daniel even knew about it. When tax regulations changed unexpectedly, I spent entire weekends studying new laws so the company wouldn't face penalties. Every crisis, I stood beside him, not because I had to, because I believed marriage meant solving problems together. But now, he had spent months treating me like an obstacle instead of a partner. Around midnight, I finally reached the oldest filing cabinet. The one Daniel hadn't opened in years. Its label simply read, "Personal." Originals inside were documents dating back to the first year of our marriage. Old insurance forms, our first mortgage application, medical records, retirement paperwork, letters from banks, everything neatly arranged in chronological order. Near the back sat an old blue folder. Dust covered the edges. I frowned. I didn't remember placing it there. Curious, I pulled it out. Unlike the other folders, it had no printed label. Only Daniel's handwriting across the front. "Keep this safe. Never throw away." My heartbeat slowed. I remembered. 15 years earlier, Daniel had rushed into the office carrying this exact folder. "I'll need these someday," he'd said. "Just keep them somewhere safe." He never asked about it again. Neither did I. I carefully opened the folder. The first document immediately caught my attention. My eyes widened. Then I turned the second page. And the third. By the fifth page, I wasn't shocked anymore. I was stunned. Every transfer Daniel had made over the past 6 months was connected to documents that had been signed more than a decade earlier. Documents he had completely forgotten existed. Documents that changed everything. For the first time since Daniel walked out of the house that evening, I smiled. Not because I wanted revenge, because I finally understood why he had looked so confident. He believed he had erased the past. He had forgotten one simple truth. I had been the person who preserved it. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I couldn't. Because every page inside the blue folder demanded to be read carefully. I carried it into the living room, made a fresh pot of coffee, and spread the documents across the dining table. By sunrise, one thing had become painfully clear. Daniel hadn't created his perfect plan. He had copied pieces of old legal agreements without remembering everything they contained. And that mistake might cost him millions. The first document was dated almost 15 years earlier. It was one of the original financing agreements from the bank that had approved the company's first commercial loan. Back then, Daniel had almost been rejected. The business was too new. He had no significant assets. Too little operating history. The loan officer had refused him twice. Eventually, the bank agreed under one condition. Every person providing startup capital had to be listed, not simply as a spouse, but as a financial contributor. I slowly reread the highlighted paragraph. Primary capital contributors: Daniel Harrison, Emily Harrison, my name, in black ink, signed by both of us. I remembered that meeting. The banker had insisted on documenting where every dollar came from. My inheritance had represented almost 40% of the startup capital. Without it, there would never have been a construction company. Daniel probably hadn't forgotten the meeting. He had forgotten the paperwork. There was a difference. People remember victories. They rarely remember the documents that made those victories possible. I opened another file. Corporate shareholder resolution. Year 2. I frowned. This wasn't possible. Daniel had always insisted he was the sole owner. But according to these early corporate records, major ownership decisions required written consent from every original financial contributor whenever substantial assets were sold. During the company's first 20 years, I read the paragraph again, then a third time. There it was. The signatures. Daniel's. Mine. The company's attorney. The bank representative. The document had never been canceled, never amended, never replaced. I leaned back in my chair. How could you forget this? The answer was simple. Because Daniel had never been interested in paperwork. He signed whatever lawyers placed in front of him. I was always the one who actually read every page. Years ago, he used to joke that contracts gave him headaches. Now that habit was coming back to haunt him. Around 8 that morning, my phone buzzed. "Daniel." I considered ignoring the call. Instead, I answered. "Good morning." His voice sounded unusually cheerful. "I wanted to check on you." "I'm fine." "I'm glad." There was a short pause. I know last night was difficult. It was. I appreciate you being mature about everything. Again. He believed calmness meant surrender. I've been thinking, he continued. If you're willing to sign everything this week, I'll transfer another $50,000 into your personal account. I almost laughed.
$52,000.
After 15 years. After helping build a business worth tens of millions. He thought $50,000 was generous. I'll review the paperwork first. Of course. But honestly, Emily, my attorney says it's straightforward. I trust your attorney. I let the sentence hang. To protect your interests. He didn't answer immediately. Then he cleared his throat. Well, I'll let you know when we're ready to meet. After ending the call, I wrote one sentence in my notebook. He wants me to sign quickly. That alone told me he was nervous. People with airtight legal cases never rush. They wait. Only people afraid of discovery push for speed. I returned to the blue folder. Halfway through the stack, another document appeared. This one wasn't from the bank. It came from Daniel's first corporate attorney. A handwritten memo. Short. Only 2 pages. The attorney had summarized several legal recommendations after the company incorporated. One sentence immediately stood out. Any future transfer of substantial company assets to immediate family members may be challenged if intended to reduce the financial interests of another lawful party. Immediate family. Michael. Daniel's brother. Exactly the person now holding almost every valuable asset. I underlined the sentence. Then highlighted it. Then made 3 photocopies. Years of accounting had taught me something simple. Never rely on one copy. Ever. Just before noon, someone knocked on my front door. It was Rachel. She carried 2 paper bags from my favorite bakery. Without saying a word, she hugged me. For the first time since Daniel left. I almost cried. Almost. Rachel placed breakfast on the kitchen counter. I figured you forgot to eat. I did. She looked around the dining room. Every surface was covered with documents. Tax returns. Contracts. Corporate records. Colored sticky notes. Legal pads. Coffee cups. You've been busy. I've been reading. She picked up one folder. What exactly are you looking for? I'm not looking anymore. I've started finding things. I explained everything. The startup agreement. The financing records. The shareholder resolutions. The attorney's memo. Rachel listened quietly. When I finished, she frowned. So, Daniel may not actually have been allowed to transfer everything? I don't know yet. But I know one thing. What? He didn't tell the whole truth. Rachel smiled for the first time that morning. I knew you weren't beaten. I never said I wasn't hurt. I know. She squeezed my hand. But being hurt and being helpless aren't the same thing. Her words stayed with me long after breakfast ended. That afternoon, I drove somewhere I hadn't visited in almost 6 years. Harrison Construction Headquarters. The receptionist looked surprised. Mrs. Harrison. It's been a while. It has. Is Mr. Harrison expecting you? No. I'm just picking up a few old accounting records. She smiled warmly. Of course. No one questioned me. Why would they? For years I had practically lived inside this building. Employees still greeted me by name. Several hugged me. Others asked how retirement was treating me. None of them knew Daniel had already replaced me in his life. I entered the accounting department. Most of the staff had changed. Only one familiar face remained. Linda. She had worked payroll beside me for nearly 10 years. The moment she saw me, her smile faded. Emily. You've heard. She nodded slowly. People have been talking. What are they saying? Linda hesitated. Then quietly closed her office door. Daniel has been moving files for months. What kind of files? Ownership records. Corporate accounts. Vendor contracts. He ordered us not to discuss them. When? About 6 months ago. Exactly when the transfers began. Linda lowered her voice even further. There was something else. What? Some employees thought it was strange. Why? Because Michael never came here. He signed documents. But nobody ever saw him. I felt every muscle in my body tighten. Documents were being signed, without the supposed owner even appearing. Interesting. Very interesting. As I prepared to leave, Linda reached inside her desk drawer. I probably shouldn't do this. She handed me a small envelope. What's this? Copies. Copies of what? The transfer requests. I made them because something felt wrong.
Ister daher.
You kept copies? She smiled nervously. I learned that habit from you. For the first time in days, I genuinely smiled. Maybe I wasn't the only person who believed paperwork mattered. As I walked toward my car, I looked down at the envelope in my hands. Daniel thought he had spent months erasing evidence. He had forgotten something important. Good employees learn from good teachers. And years ago, I had taught every accountant in that company one simple rule. Never destroy the paper trail. I didn't open the envelope Linda had given me until I arrived home. Not because I wasn't curious, because I wanted complete silence.
No distractions. No interruptions.
I carried it into my office, closed the door, and carefully emptied the contents onto my desk. 5 photocopied documents slid onto the polished wood surface. At first glance, they appeared ordinary. Transfer requests, authorization forms, internal approval sheets. Nothing dramatic. But accounting had taught me something years ago. The biggest mistakes are usually hidden inside ordinary paperwork. I began reading the first page. The request authorized the transfer of 3 company-owned commercial properties to Michael Harrison. Estimated value, $4,800,000. Purchase price, $100. Again, $100. No legitimate business sells nearly $5 million worth of real estate for $100, unless there is another purpose behind the transaction. I turned to the second document. Company equipment, heavy machinery, excavators, bulldozers, cranes, everything transferred. Again. For almost nothing. The third document caught my attention immediately. It wasn't signed by Daniel. At least, not entirely. The signature looked different. I leaned closer. The handwriting resembled Daniel's, but something about it felt awkward, forced, as if someone had copied his signature instead of naturally writing it. I pulled open another drawer and removed several older contracts Daniel had signed years before. Then I placed them side by side. Same name, same letters, but not the same movement. Daniel usually wrote quickly, smoothly. These newer signatures looked hesitant, almost traced. I wasn't a handwriting expert, but I knew enough to recognize inconsistency. Interesting. Very interesting. I took photographs of every page before placing them inside plastic sleeves.
No fingerprints. No coffee stands. No unnecessary handling.
If these documents became evidence one day, I wanted them preserved. Around 3 o'clock that afternoon, my phone rang. The caller ID displayed a name I hadn't expected. Michael Harrison, Daniel's older brother. I hesitated before answering. Hello, Michael. His voice sounded uncomfortable. Emily. I heard about you and Daniel.
I'm sorry.
Thank you. Several seconds passed. Neither of us seemed sure what to say. Finally, he cleared his throat. I know this probably isn't my place. But Daniel says everything is being handled peacefully. Interesting. He sounded uncertain, as though he only knew part of the story. I suppose that depends on your definition of peaceful. Another silence. Then Michael asked something unexpected. Emily, can I ask you a strange question? Of course. Did Daniel ever mention asking me to manage his properties? I froze. What do you mean? He told me he was restructuring some investments. I signed a few documents 6 months ago. But honestly, I never paid much attention. Every instinct I had suddenly sharpened. You sign documents? Yes. What kind? I don't really know. He said it was temporary. He asked me to help him simplify taxes. Taxes? That explanation again. The kind people often use because it sounds believable. Michael, did you ever receive house keys? No. Business records? No. Investment statements? No. Property tax bills? No. I slowly sat down. So despite supposedly owning millions of dollars in assets, you've never managed any of them? He laughed nervously. I've never even seen most of them. Exactly. Which meant one thing. Michael wasn't acting like an owner. He was acting like a name. Someone whose identity had been borrowed to move assets. He sounded genuinely confused. Emily. Is something wrong? I don't know yet. But I think you should avoid signing anything else. His breathing became heavier. You're making me nervous. I don't mean to. I just think you deserve to understand exactly what you've signed. He agreed surprisingly quickly. If you need copies of anything I have, I'll send them. After we ended the call, I remained motionless. Daniel believed Michael was part of his plan. But judging from that conversation, Michael didn't understand the plan at all. That changed everything. Because confused witnesses often become honest witnesses. Late that afternoon, I called someone I hadn't spoken with in almost 8 years. Richard Lawson, the attorney who had handled our first corporate financing. He was semi-retired now. I wasn't even sure he still practiced. His receptionist answered. Lawson Legal. My name is Emily Harrison. There was a brief pause. Oh my goodness. Mrs. Harrison. Mr. Lawson remembers you. Is he available? One moment. A minute later, Richard himself answered. Emily. It's been far too long. It has. I wish I were calling under better circumstances. His voice immediately became serious. What's happened? I need legal advice. I assumed as much. I can't discuss details over the phone. But. He paused. I still have some archived files from the early years of Harrison Construction. My heart skipped. You do. I keep everything. I smiled despite everything happening around me. So do I. He chuckled softly. I remember. You were always the organized one. We arranged to meet the following morning. After ending the call, I looked back at the blue folder. Every hour seemed to uncover another forgotten piece of history. That evening, while organizing my notes, the doorbell rang again. This time it wasn't Rachel. It was Daniel. Alone. He stood on the porch holding a bottle of expensive wine, almost as if he were visiting friends. I thought we could talk. I crossed my arms. We already did. I don't want things to become ugly. They didn't become ugly today. They became dishonest months ago. His smile disappeared. I knew you'd eventually calm down. I am calm. I just have questions. He relaxed again. Ask anything. Why your brother? He shrugged. Because I trust him. Does he know he owns everything? Daniel hesitated. Of course. Interesting. Because Michael's answers suggested otherwise. I continued. When exactly did he begin managing the properties? Daniel looked away briefly. He doesn't need to manage them. Then why transfer ownership? It's temporary. Again, temporary. The same word Michael had used. Only one of them had obviously invented it. I stepped closer. Daniel, if everything you've done is perfectly legal, why are you struggling to explain it? For the first time, he looked uncomfortable. Only for a second. Then the confident businessman returned. My attorneys handled everything. I'm sure they did. I don't really understand all the legal details. There it was. The first genuine crack. Daniel wasn't describing his own plan anymore. He was hiding behind professionals. People usually do that when they don't fully understand what they've signed. He looked at me carefully. You've always trusted me. I did. You should continue trusting me. I almost laughed. Trust. Coming from the man who introduced his mistress inside our home. No, Daniel. I think from now on, I'll trust documents. His jaw tightened. He realized something in that moment. I wasn't reacting like the wife he expected. I wasn't begging. I wasn't bargaining. I wasn't signing. I was investigating. And that frightened him. He quietly placed the wine bottle on the porch. I'll come back in a few days. I'll have an answer by then. He nodded once before walking toward his car. As he drove away, I noticed something unusual. Instead of immediately leaving the neighborhood, he parked 2 houses away. Then he picked up his phone. Within seconds, he appeared to be speaking urgently to someone. Probably Claire. Maybe his attorney. Maybe both. He stayed there almost 10 minutes before finally driving away. I watched from behind the living room curtains until his car disappeared. Then I returned to my office. I opened my notebook. Across the top of a fresh page, I wrote 3 names. Daniel Harrison, Michael Harrison, Richard Lawson. Tomorrow, one of those men would tell me the truth, whether he intended to or not. The next morning, I arrived at Richard Lawson's office 15 minutes early. Some things never change. I had always believed arriving early gave you one priceless advantage: time to observe. Richard's office occupied the second floor of an old brick building downtown. It wasn't luxurious like the modern law firms Daniel preferred now, but everything inside reflected decades of experience. Dark wooden bookshelves lined every wall. Leather-bound legal volumes filled the shelves. Family photographs rested beside framed certificates. Nothing here felt designed to impress clients. It felt designed to solve problems. Richard walked out of his office with a warm smile. "Emily." He shook my hand firmly. "I'm sorry we have to meet under these circumstances." "So am I." He motioned toward his office. "Come in." As soon as the door closed, his expression became serious. "I assume this isn't just about divorce." "It isn't." I placed the blue folder on his desk. "I think Daniel forgot something." Richard adjusted his reading glasses. Knowing Daniel, that wouldn't surprise me. He opened the folder. For nearly 10 minutes, neither of us spoke. The only sounds were pages turning and an occasional note being written in the margin. I watched his face carefully. First he appeared curious, then surprised, then increasingly concerned. Finally, he leaned back in his chair and removed his glasses. "When was the last time Daniel looked at these documents?" "I honestly don't know." Richard sighed. "I'm fairly certain the answer is never." He slid one document toward me. "Do you remember signing this?" I looked down. It was dated 14 years earlier. The title read, Founders Capital Protection Agreement. Slowly, memories returned. The company had just secured its first major commercial contract. The bank had required additional legal protections before extending a larger credit line. Daniel had been in a hurry that day. He kept glancing at his phone while Richard explained the paperwork. "I remember signing several documents, but not the details." Richard nodded. "That makes sense. You were focused on helping the company grow. So was Daniel." He tapped the agreement with his finger. "This document was drafted because of your inheritance." "My inheritance?" "Yes. The bank considered your investment unusually large. So they wanted to make sure your contribution couldn't simply disappear if ownership changed." A chill ran through my body. Richard continued. "The agreement wasn't designed for divorce. It was designed to protect startup investors. But legally." He paused. "You qualified as one." I looked back at the page. There, beneath paragraphs of legal language, one sentence had been underlined years ago. "Any transfer of substantial business assets intended to reduce the financial interest of an original capital contributor shall require written acknowledgement from every listed contributor." Richard looked directly at me. "Did Daniel ever ask for your written approval?" "No. Not once. Never." He slowly folded his hands. "Then we have a problem. A serious one." I remained silent. Richard chose his next words. Carefully. "I can't promise how a judge would rule. But I can tell you this. If Daniel transferred company assets without satisfying these conditions, those transfers may be challenged." I took a slow breath. "So everything isn't necessarily gone?" "No. Not necessarily." For the first time since Daniel announced the divorce, hope quietly entered the room. Richard wasn't finished. He reached for another document inside the blue folder. "This one concerns me even more." It was an amendment filed 3 years after the company was founded. I had forgotten it completely. Back then, the business had nearly collapsed after a major contractor declared bankruptcy. Daniel had been desperate. Suppliers wanted payment. Employees still needed salaries. Banks refused additional financing. Richard pointed toward the second page. "Who provided the emergency operating funds?" I looked at the numbers. Then I remembered. I did. Exactly. You loaned the company $400,000. It wasn't a gift. It was documented as shareholder debt. Suddenly memories flooded back. I had liquidated mutual funds, sold bonds inherited from my parents, even emptied part of my retirement account. Not because anyone forced me, because I believed saving the company meant saving our future. Richard looked almost amazed. Emily, do you know what happened after that? I assumed the company repaid the loan. He shook his head. No. It refinanced. But your debt, he searched another page, was never formally cancelled. I stared at him. What does that mean? It means the company may still legally owe you. The room became perfectly still. Daniel had spent months transferring assets, hiding ownership, protecting property. Yet somehow, he had forgotten one of the largest financial obligations the company had ever recorded. Not to a bank. Not to an investor. To me. Richard stood and walked toward an old filing cabinet. I had a feeling this might matter. He unlocked the drawer and removed several archived folders. I keep duplicates of important corporate records. I know. He smiled. You insisted on that policy. I couldn't help smiling back.
I guess he
did. He laid another folder beside the blue one. Inside were payment schedules, loan summaries, board meeting minutes. Every document told the same story. The debt had never disappeared. It had simply been ignored. Richard highlighted one line. The obligation survives changes in ownership. I frowned. So even if Michael owns the company, the debt follows the company. Exactly. I slowly leaned back. Daniel thought ownership solved everything. But debts don't disappear simply because assets change hands. In many ways, they become someone else's problem. Richard folded his arms. I need to ask something. Go ahead. Has Daniel already filed the divorce petition? Not yet. Interesting. Why? Because he's trying to pressure you into signing first. So he controls the timing. Richard nodded. That tells me he believes speed favors him. He looked directly at me. It usually means someone fears closer examination. I thought about Daniel offering $50,000, about his repeated requests to sign immediately, about how confident he had sounded. Confidence and desperation often wear the same face. The difference only becomes visible after enough questions are asked. Richard closed the blue folder. I think it's time you hired an attorney. I was hoping you'd say that. He smiled. I was hoping you'd ask. For the next hour we reviewed every major transfer Daniel had completed. Richard made careful notes. Dates.
dollar amounts.
Property descriptions. Corporate resolutions. By the end of the meeting, one pattern had become impossible to ignore. Almost every transfer occurred within 6 months. Every recipient was Michael. Every purchase price was symbolic. Every transaction reduced the marital estate. Richard finally put down his pen. If I represented Daniel, I would be extremely worried. Those words carried more weight than any promise. Richard had practiced corporate law for nearly 40 years. He wasn't dramatic. He didn't exaggerate. If he said someone should worry, they should worry. As I prepared to leave, he handed me a neatly organized folder. I've made certified copies. Keep the original somewhere safe. I will. And Emily. I stopped at the door. Don't tell Daniel what you found. Why not? Because confident people make mistakes. But frightened people destroy evidence. Outside, the morning air felt different. Lighter. For the first time in days, I wasn't reacting. I was preparing. As I walked toward my car, my phone vibrated. A text message from Daniel appeared on the screen. Have you finished reading the papers? I'd like your answer tonight. I looked at the message for several seconds before typing a single reply. Yes, I've started reading much more than your papers. 3 dots appeared almost immediately. Daniel was typing. Then they disappeared. He never sent another message. For the first time since he walked into our house with Claire. He had no immediate answer. And somewhere deep inside I knew exactly why. His perfect plan had finally encountered the one thing he had never expected. the woman who had organized every piece of his past, was now using it to understand his future. I deliberately ignored Daniel's message, not because I wanted to play games, because Richard was right. The moment Daniel realized I had discovered the truth, he would stop making mistakes. And right now, his mistakes were becoming my strongest evidence. Back home, I transformed the dining room into what Rachel jokingly called mission control. Stacks of folders covered one side of the table. Colored tabs divided documents by category. Blue for company records, yellow for bank documents, green for property transfers, red for anything involving Michael. On the opposite side sat a large legal notebook. Across the first page I wrote a single sentence. What can I prove, not what do I believe? That question had guided me throughout my accounting career. Assumptions lost lawsuits. Evidence won them. As I reviewed the timeline Richard and I had created, another pattern slowly emerged. Daniel hadn't moved everything at once. He had done it in stages. First the company shares. A month later, several commercial properties. Then the equipment. Then the investment accounts. Finally, our family home. Each transfer occurred only days after large business payments entered the company's accounts. It wasn't random. He had waited until assets increased in value before moving them, almost as though someone had advised him exactly how to reduce what appeared to belong to our marriage. I highlighted every date, then compared them with another folder. Company board meeting minutes. Something immediately caught my attention. Several transfers had supposedly been approved during board meetings. Except, those meetings had never actually taken place. I searched through every calendar I had archived over the years. Nothing.
No invitations.
No attendance records.
No agendas.
Only unsigned meeting templates. I frowned. Either the meetings had been fabricated, or someone had completed paperwork after the fact. Neither possibility helped Daniel. Just then my phone rang. Rachel, have you eaten lunch? She asked before saying hello. I smiled. Not yet. I knew it. I'm bringing food. 20 minutes later she arrived carrying sandwiches and coffee. She stopped in the doorway and laughed. I swear this house looks more like a law office every day. It feels that way. She placed lunch on the counter before sitting beside me. So, what have you found today? I handed her the timeline. She read quietly for several minutes, then pointed toward one date. Wait. This transfer happened on your anniversary. I looked closer. She was right. While Daniel had taken me to an expensive restaurant that evening, he had also transferred ownership of 3 commercial buildings to Michael. I remembered that dinner vividly. Daniel had ordered champagne, given me a diamond bracelet, raised a toast to many more years together. The memory made me sick. Even while pretending to celebrate our marriage, he had been quietly dismantling it. Rachel shook her head. I don't understand how someone lives with that. I don't either. But people convince themselves of almost anything if enough money is involved. Before we could continue, another notification appeared on my phone. This time it wasn't Daniel. It was Linda. Can we meet? There's something you should know. I replied immediately. Where? She suggested a small coffee shop several miles away from the company headquarters. An hour later we sat in a quiet corner booth. Linda looked nervous. She kept glancing toward the entrance. Is everything all right? I asked. She nodded. I think so. But I didn't want to call the office. What happened? She lowered her voice. Daniel was here this morning. So, he asked accounting to locate every archived financial record from the company's first 5 years. My heartbeat quickened. Why? He didn't say. But he seemed. She searched for the right word. Agitated. That wasn't the Daniel everyone admired. The Daniel I knew believed planning eliminated panic. If he was suddenly searching through 15-year-old records, something had frightened him. What else? Linda hesitated. He also asked whether anyone had contacted you. I remained silent. I told him no. Thank you. She reached into her purse. I brought something. Another envelope. Inside were photocopies of internal emails. I quickly skimmed the first message. My eyes widened. It had been sent only 3 weeks earlier. From Daniel. To the company's chief financial officer. Delete duplicate accounting archives after ownership transition is complete. Delete. That single word echoed in my mind. The CFO's reply followed immediately. We still have legally required retention periods. Daniel answered again. Then remove anything not legally required. I looked up at Linda. Did anyone delete them? She shook her head. No. The IT department refused. Relief washed over me. Destroying company records wasn't something responsible employees took lightly. Linda smiled faintly. You trained most of us. We remembered what you always said. I smiled. Never destroy a paper trail. She nodded. Exactly. After we finished coffee, Linda said something that caught me completely off guard. Emily, I don't think everyone inside the company is on Daniel's side. What do you mean? People respected you. They haven't forgotten everything you did. She looked around once more before continuing. If this becomes a legal fight, I think several employees will tell the truth. Those words stayed with me the entire drive home. Daniel believed he controlled the company, but loyalty isn't purchased with a paycheck alone. It is earned over years. That evening my phone rang again. This time, Michael. His voice sounded tense. We need to meet. When? Tonight. Is everything all right? No. He paused. I finally opened the box Daniel gave me. What box? The one he told me not to touch unless something happened to him. I gripped the steering wheel tighter. What was inside? Property deeds. Corporate certificates. Investment statements. I said nothing. Michael continued. I don't understand any of this. He told me they were temporary. But according to these papers, I apparently own almost everything. Did he explain why? No. He only kept saying he needed someone he could trust. Michael sounded genuinely distressed. I thought I was helping my little brother. I never agreed to take your home. Those words carried something I hadn't expected. Remorse. We agreed to meet at his house the following afternoon. After ending the call, I walked into my office and updated the timeline again. A new name was slowly moving from Daniel's side to mine. Michael. Not because he suddenly supported me, because he finally understood what had been done in his name. Around 9 that night, Daniel called again. I answered this time. Emily. His voice sounded strained. Have you made a decision? I have. There was a pause. And I won't be signing anything. Silence. Longer than before. Finally he spoke. I don't think you understand the situation. I understand it better every day. His breathing changed. Did you hire a lawyer? I've spoken with one. Another silence. Then came a question that confirmed every suspicion I developed over the past week. What documents have you been looking at? How are you? Can we talk? Are you all right? Only one concern. Documents. I smiled quietly. The ones you forgot. He stopped breathing for just a fraction of a second. It was almost impossible to notice. But after 15 years of marriage, I knew every pause in Daniel's voice. What do you mean? He asked carefully. I think you know exactly what I mean. He recovered quickly. I have no idea. That's the problem. You should. Neither of us spoke. Finally, he ended the conversation with a sentence that sounded more like a warning than a goodbye. This doesn't have to become ugly. I looked across the dining table at the blue folder, the original startup agreements, the financing records, the forgotten loan, the internal emails, the transfer documents. 1 week earlier, Daniel believed he had already won. Now, he wasn't asking me to sign anymore. He was trying to discover exactly how much I knew. And when the person hiding secrets starts asking questions instead of giving answers, their confidence is already beginning to collapse. The following afternoon, I drove to Michael's house with far more questions than answers. He lived in a quiet neighborhood nearly 3 hours outside Chicago, in a modest 2-story home that couldn't have been more different from the luxurious lifestyle Daniel had built over the past decade. Michael greeted me at the front door with tired eyes. He looked as though he hadn't slept. Thank you for coming, he said. I wasn't sure you would. I almost didn't. He nodded. I wouldn't have blamed you. Inside, his dining room table was covered with documents, property deeds, corporate certificates, investment statements, insurance policies, everything Daniel had supposedly transferred to him. Michael pulled out a chair. I started reading these last night. I still don't understand half of them. I sat across from him. Tell me exactly what happened. He rubbed his forehead before answering. About 6 months ago, Daniel called. He said he needed my help. Help with what? He said his financial advisors recommended restructuring some assets. Michael looked embarrassed. He told me wealthy people did this all the time. Did you believe him? I did. He's my younger brother. I never imagined he would ask me to do something dishonest. He reached for a thick folder. He brought all these papers to my house. Said I only needed to sign where the sticky notes were. I frowned. You didn't read them? He gave a small, ashamed smile. I should have. But Daniel has always handled business. I've spent my entire life teaching high school history. I trusted him. His answer sounded painfully honest. Michael wasn't a businessman. He wasn't experienced in corporate law. He was simply an older brother who believed he was helping family. When you signed, I asked, did anyone else explain the documents? No. No attorney? No. No accountant? No. Only Daniel. That detail mattered. A great deal. Because it meant Daniel had controlled every conversation, every explanation, every signature. Michael stood and walked toward a cabinet. I found something else. He returned carrying a small notebook. It's mine. I started writing things down after Daniel visited. You keep notes. I've done it for years. Old teacher habit. He handed it to me. The pages contained handwritten entries dating back several months. One sentence immediately caught my attention. Daniel said Emily must never know until everything is finished. I looked up. You wrote this the day he visited? Michael nodded. I always write important conversations. Another page. Daniel said lawyers worry too much. Better if nobody asks unnecessary questions. Then another. Temporary transfer. Everything comes back after the divorce. I slowly closed the notebook. This wasn't just memory anymore. It was a timeline, created before any legal dispute existed. Exactly the kind of evidence courts often found persuasive. Michael sighed heavily. I've been asking myself the same question all night. What question? If everything was legal, why was it supposed to stay secret from you? Neither of us spoke, because we both knew the answer. He looked genuinely heartbroken. I feel like I helped him betray you. You didn't know. I should have. No. I shook my head. You trusted your brother. That's not a crime. He stared at the documents covering the table. What happens now? I honestly don't know. But I won't lie to protect him. Michael nodded slowly. Neither will I. Those 4 words changed everything. For the first time since this nightmare began, I wasn't standing alone. That evening Richard called. I've finished reviewing everything. And you need to come by tomorrow. Is it serious? Very. His tone told me all I needed to know. The next morning, I arrived carrying 2 boxes of documents. Richard already had several files spread across his conference table. When I entered, he looked unusually focused. I've compared the transfer dates with county property records. What did you find? He slid several printouts toward me. The dates don't match. I looked carefully. The property deeds Daniel had shown me carried one set of dates. The county filings carried another. Some had been filed weeks later. Others months later. One hadn't even been fully processed. What does this mean? I asked. It means Daniel may have presented completed transfers before they were actually completed. He tapped another document. There's more. The company valuation. I frowned. What about it? 6 months ago, the business was appraised at approximately $18 million. I nodded. I remember. Richard opened another report. The value listed on Daniel's transfer documents? I looked down. $5 million. Less than 1/3 of the actual valuation. I looked back up. That's impossible. No. It's intentional. If assets are undervalued, certain taxes decrease. So can financial obligations. My stomach tightened. So he didn't just move assets. He reduced their value on paper. Richard nodded. That's what it appears. He remained silent for a moment before adding, and judges tend to notice things like that. That afternoon, another surprise arrived. Claire. She stood outside my front door looking nothing like the confident woman who had walked into my home 2 weeks earlier. She looked exhausted, almost frightened. When I opened the door, she spoke before I could. I need to talk to you. I don't think that's appropriate. Please. It won't take long. Against my better judgment, I let her inside. She remained standing. I didn't know. I folded my arms. Didn't know what? I knew Daniel was divorcing you. I knew he'd transferred property. But she hesitated. I didn't know he transferred everything. I studied her face carefully. She wasn't pretending. There were dark circles beneath her eyes. Her hands trembled. What changed? I asked him yesterday. Asked him what? When we'd move into the house. He said. She swallowed hard. He couldn't promise anything anymore. Why? He kept saying lawyers were making things complicated. She looked directly at me. Then he admitted. The company might have problems. Richard's words echoed inside my mind. Confidence had turned into concern. Now concern was turning into panic. Claire lowered her eyes. I don't want money that belongs to someone else. I said nothing. She reached into her handbag. I found these. She placed several printed emails on my coffee table. I wasn't supposed to see them. The sender was Daniel. The recipient was Claire. One message immediately stood out. Everything will be finished before Emily discovers the transfers. Another. Once the divorce is final, we'll put everything back where it belongs. Another. Don't discuss the paperwork with anyone. I slowly looked up. Why are you giving me these? Claire's eyes filled with tears. Because I finally realized. If he'll lie to his wife of 15 years, he'll eventually lie to me too. For the first time, I almost felt sorry for her. Not because she was innocent. She wasn't. She had knowingly entered a relationship with a married man. But she had also believed Daniel's version of events. Just as Michael had. Just as so many others had. The only difference was that the lie was finally beginning to collapse under its own weight. After Claire left, I organized the new emails inside the blue folder. Then I added Michael's notebook, Linda's internal emails, Richard's legal research, the county property records. The evidence was growing faster than I had ever imagined. Daniel had spent nearly a year constructing the perfect illusion, one careful step at a time. But now, every person who had unknowingly helped build that illusion was beginning to tell the truth. And lies have one fatal weakness. The more people required to protect them, the faster they fall apart. 3 weeks later, the hearing finally arrived. I woke before sunrise. Not because I was nervous, because I had spent my entire life believing that preparation creates confidence. By 6:30 that morning, I was already dressed in a navy blue suit I had worn years earlier when Daniel and I attended the ceremony celebrating our company's 10th anniversary. Back then, he had introduced me as his greatest supporter. Today, he would probably pretend we had never built anything together. Rachel drove me to the courthouse. You okay? She asked as we stopped at a red light. I looked out the window. I think so. You don't sound convinced. I'm not afraid of losing. She glanced at me. Then what are you afraid of? I spent 15 years believing I knew the man I married. I don't know him anymore. Rachel reached across the console and squeezed my hand. Maybe you never really lost him. Maybe he slowly became someone else. Her words stayed with me as we entered the courthouse. Richard was already waiting near the courtroom entrance. He carried 2 large document boxes. Each one was neatly labeled. Corporate records. Financial evidence. He smiled. Ready. I've been ready for weeks. Good. He lowered his voice. I've also received something unexpected this morning. What? Michael arrived 30 minutes ago. I frowned. He did. Richard nodded. He brought his own attorney. That surprised me. Michael hadn't mentioned hiring legal representation. What does that mean? Richard smiled slightly. It means he intends to tell the truth. When Daniel entered the hallway, nearly everyone looked toward him. He wore an expensive charcoal suit. His confidence was still there. But something had changed. His smile no longer reached his eyes. Claire wasn't with him. Instead, two attorneys followed close behind. Daniel noticed me immediately. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then he walked over. Emily. Daniel. I still think we can settle this privately. I looked calmly at him. I thought everything was already settled. His jaw tightened. It doesn't have to become public. I almost smiled. Public. Now he was worried about publicity. 3 weeks earlier he had wanted speed. Now, he wanted secrecy. Richard stepped between us. If you have settlement proposals, you may direct them to me. Daniel nodded stiffly, then walked away. Richard quietly whispered, "He's nervous." I noticed. So did his attorneys. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere felt strangely quiet.
No dramatic speeches.
No shouting. Just professionals preparing for another ordinary day. But for me, this wasn't ordinary. This was 15 years of my life waiting to be judged. The judge entered. Everyone stood. After several preliminary matters, our case was called. Richard stood first. So did Daniel's lead attorney. The judge reviewed the initial filings before looking toward both sides. I understand there are disputes regarding the division of marital assets. Richard nodded. Yes, Your Honor. And substantial questions regarding several recent property transfers. The judge looked toward Daniel. His attorney responded confidently. Your Honor, the transfers were completed before divorce proceedings. They represent lawful estate planning. Richard didn't interrupt. He simply waited. The judge turned toward him. Mr. Lawson? Richard stood slowly. We believe the evidence will show something quite different. He opened the first document box. I'd like to begin with the company's original financing records. Daniel shifted in his chair. Only slightly, but I noticed. Richard handed several certified documents to the court clerk. These records establish Mrs. Harrison as an original capital contributor. The judge examined the paperwork carefully, then nodded. I see her name. Richard continued. We also submit the founder's capital protection agreement. Again, copies were distributed. Daniel leaned toward his attorney. They whispered urgently. The judge spent nearly 2 minutes reading the agreement. Finally, she looked up. Counsel. This document appears to require written acknowledgement from original contributors before certain asset transfers. Richard answered calmly. Exactly. The judge looked toward Daniel's attorney. Was such acknowledgement obtained? The attorney hesitated. He looked toward Daniel. Daniel whispered something. The attorney cleared his throat. We were unaware this agreement still existed. Richard said nothing. He didn't need to. The silence itself spoke loudly. Next came the property transfers. Richard displayed the purchase prices. $10, $100, $100 again. The judge raised an eyebrow. Counsel. These values appear unusually low. Daniel's attorney attempted to explain. They were family transfers. Richard stood again. We anticipated that explanation. He presented the county valuation reports. The difference was staggering. Properties worth millions. Transferred for almost nothing. The judge carefully compared both documents. Her expression became increasingly serious. Then Richard called the first witness. Michael Harrison. Daniel looked genuinely shocked. His own brother walked calmly to the witness stand. After taking the oath, Michael answered every question clearly. Did you believe these transfers were permanent? No. What were you told? That they were temporary. Who told you that? My brother. Did you negotiate purchase prices? No. Did you manage the properties? No. Did you receive rental income? No. Did you operate the construction company? No. So despite being listed as owner, you exercised none of the responsibilities of ownership? Correct. The courtroom became noticeably quieter. Daniel avoided looking toward his brother. Then came Linda. She testified about the accounting department, about Daniel's instructions, about searching for archived records, about emails requesting unnecessary files be removed. Richard submitted printed copies. The judge reviewed them carefully, then asked one simple question. Did the company comply with those requests? Linda answered honestly, no. We retained every required record. Richard smiled slightly. So the paper trail remained intact? Yes. Finally, Richard turned toward me. Mrs. Harrison, how long did you maintain the company's financial records? 15 years. Did your husband regularly review archived documents? No. Who organized them? I did. He nodded. Can you explain how the blue folder was discovered? I told the story exactly as it happened.
No exagerasten. No emotion.
Only facts. How Daniel had asked me years earlier to keep it safe. How neither of us had opened it again. How the forgotten agreements remained untouched until after he announced the divorce. When I finished, the courtroom was silent. The judge looked toward Daniel, then toward the blue folder resting on the evidence table. You asked your wife to preserve these records? Daniel answered quietly. Yes. And she did exactly that? Yes. The judge slowly closed the file. It appears Mrs. Harrison fulfilled her responsibilities remarkably well. For the first time that morning, Daniel lowered his head. His confidence was gone. Not because anyone had shouted at him. Not because anyone had humiliated him. Because every document he had forgotten had survived. Every signature, every agreement, every financial record, protected for 15 years. By the very woman he believed knew nothing. The judge announced a short recess before the afternoon session. As everyone began leaving the courtroom, Richard leaned toward me. This isn't over. I know. He smiled. But Daniel's biggest mistake has already happened. What was that? He spent months trying to erase your future, and forgot that you were the one who had preserved his past. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to tell us in the comments. What do you think was Daniel's biggest mistake? Was it his betrayal? Or believing he could erase 15 years of truth with a few signatures? We read every comment, and we'd love to hear your thoughts. If you enjoy powerful stories about family, betrayal, justice, and second chances, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our next unforgettable story. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.